Hello and welcome to this revision video on Edexcel GCSE Paper 3 Weimar and Nazi Germany. Okay, so I'm using the specification to structure this video. The first key topic is key topic 1, and it's focusing specifically on 1918 to 1929. So the first part, it's the first year or so of the Weimar Republic. So the first thing you need to know is the First World War has led to chaos in Germany. There are mutinies. The German military is not following orders. There has been 750,000 German people have died of food shortages. 2 million people have died in the war, and Germany was 150 billion marks in debt. So the Kaiser abdicates on the 9th of November 1918. And so as a result, we get a new, very inexperienced government that takes over just after the Kaiser goes. The first thing they have to do is sign the armistice on the 11th of November 1918. We then get a new government, a new constitution that has been set up in 1919, and it's called Weimar because of the town where it was made. Berlin was too dangerous at this time. So in terms of this new constitution that they come up with, the main positive thing is going to be democratic, but in an emergency, which is difficult to define and is quite subjective, the president will have a lot of power and will be able to pass laws without always asking the MPs in the Reichstag. So basically, in some cases, emergencies, Germany will not actually be very democratic at all, because the people who have been voted in will actually just be ignored, these MPs. And I did forget to say as well, this is a really simple overview of the course. There are other things that will be missing. So, for example, there are loads of other strengths and weaknesses of the Constitution, but I'm just focusing on a couple of things here. So the next part of the course looks at 1919 to 1923, the early challenges to the Weimar Republic. So the first thing, in January 1919, we get the communist uprising in Berlin, which fails because the Freikorps soldiers step in to help the government. Even though these Freikorps soldiers don't really like the government, they really hate communism. So they step in to protect the Weimar government in January 1919. The Republic was straight away unpopular for signing the armistice to end the war in 1918, and then later on for signing the Treaty of Versailles, which is seen to be very harsh on Germany in June 1919. So in terms of this Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost land to Poland, and France, they lost all of their colonies. They had to pay £6.6 billion in reparation, and their army was reduced to £100,000. There are some other things as well that you could revise. So straight away, these new Weimar governments are unpopular, and they're accused of stabbing the German army in the back. The general belief here is that Germany could still have won the war, and that the Weimar government has essentially surrendered in the war when Germany could still have won. Get the stab in the back myth. The German Weimar government is also known as the November criminals. So these Freikorps, these ex-soldiers, had previously protected the government against the communists. Now they turn on the government in March 1920 in the Kapp Putsch. The Kapp Putsch fails because the workers go on strike. So we've had 2 attempts so far at uprisings, and they've both failed. Now, the next problem that Germany has in this initial period, or the Weimar government has in this initial period, is hyperinflation. So what's happened here is very simple. Germany, as part of the Treaty of Versailles, needs to pay reparations to France. In January 1923, they're expected to pay a reparation payment, and they just can't afford to do it. So the French are annoyed that they're not getting their money. So they say, okay, well, we're going to invade and get the money ourselves. So the French army invades the Ruhr, which is the industrial heartland of Germany. And what they start doing is they start taking over German factories, for example, coal places producing coal mines. And what they do is they're simply just going to take those resources and take it back out to France. Now, the German government is angry because their country has essentially been invaded. So they say to the workers, stop in all the factories, in the mines, etc. Stop working, go on strike. The German workers are saying, well, we would go on strike, but we need to be paid. The German government says, do not worry. You're going to go on strike, but we will pay you anyway. Now, remember, the German government hasn't had the money in the first place. That's why they haven't been able to pay the reparations. So in order to solve this problem, they make the really unwise decision to just simply print more money. in order to pay the striking workers. This is a bad idea and it leads to hyperinflation. So the currency becomes worthless and a loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks at the height of the crisis. Now, you need to know about the winners and the losers. One key thing you could say is that people with savings lost out and people in debt did well. Because, for example, imagine you had 200 billion marks in savings, you would have been a billionaire. But actually, after hyperinflation, you can withdraw that 200 billion marks and you can only actually buy a loaf of bread with it. Whereas before hyperinflation, you would have been extremely rich, but not after hyperinflation. So the next part of the course is how things actually do start getting better for the Weimar Republic. We get the recovery of the Republic between 1924 and 1929. So how does the economy recover? Well, the first thing is, and this is all linked to Stressman, by the way. First thing is they just get rid of the old currency and they introduce a new currency called the Rentenmark. So hyperinflation is ended. By the way, the people who have lost money in hyperinflation, they're not getting their money back, but at least it ends this terrible episode for Germany. Now, that's a positive thing. The other thing is reparation payments are first of all reduced with the Dawes Plan of 1924. So with the Dawes Plan, Germany gets longer to pay back the reparations. So each year, they actually don't have to pay back as much at first. And it gets even better because with the Young Plan in 1929, they now actually, their reparations will go down from 6.6 billion pounds to actually 2 billion pounds. So the key thing here is the economy is improved because they're having to pay less in reparations. And the third way that the economy has improved is a little bit dodgy. They've actually had to borrow lots of money, $25 billion from US banks with the Dawes Plan in 1924. Another point you could make is Germany's reputation abroad improves, and so they're able to trade more. And Stressman is the German chancellor at first, but then he becomes the foreign secretary until his death in 1929. And as foreign secretary, he does a really good job at improving Germany's reputation abroad. So first thing, Germany agrees to the Locarno Pact in 1925. What they're doing is Germany is now just saying that they accept the borders from the Treaty of Versailles. Even if they were seen to be quite harsh, Stressman saying, don't worry, we accept that. People like Hitler would be annoyed at this. They think this makes Germany look weak. They're also going to join the League of Nations, which will eventually turn into the UN. And they also signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928, which is an agreement which is all about saying that these countries, many countries in the world, will try and solve their problems through peaceful means. Okay, so we're still looking at the Weimar period 1924 to 1929. Now we look at society. So there are some improvements to standards of living. So wages go up by 25%. 100,000 more houses are built. We get lower unemployment. There is still unemployment though, but it's gone down. Shorter working week, it's gone down from 50 hours a week to 46 hours a week. So that's fantastic. The workers just don't have to work as much. There's better education, and there's also unemployment insurance, which is going to help 16 million workers. What happens is workers each month, when they're getting paid and they're working, everything's good, they'll pay a tiny bit of their salary into this unemployment insurance. Now, it's annoying because they're having to lose a bit of their money each month, but it's fine. It's really good though, because if they get unwell, really sick, if something means they can no longer work, they're actually going to still get money, which means that it's not going to be the end of the world, and actually they're still going to have some money coming in. However, there are some issues. Still not enough housing. There were 1 million houses. There was a shortage of 1 million houses before this, and they've not filled that gap. Farmers and middle class also do not see big improvements. And by the way, it's important that you note this, that it's the middle class later on who will disproportionately support Hitler. In terms of women, we do get some changes. More women are in work, such as working as doctors, but they always get lower wages than men. We get 112 female MPs, which is an improvement, but they still have a majority of male MPs in the Reichstag, and women can vote. We get something called new women. They've got more shorter hair, they're wearing more makeup, more jewelry, more revealing clothes, more independent from usually their male partners. But we also get more divorce, which you might say is a good or a bad thing, depending on your outlook. And there's a lower birth rate. Women are not prioritizing having children as much. So in terms of culture, well, there are some really exciting changes at this time. It's more focused on futurism and modernism, expressionism. Key things you need to know. There's changes to architecture with the Bauhaus movement. Art changes a lot. Before, art in Germany used to be a lot more boring, just kind of focusing on pictures of nature. Now, actually, it's really changing with artists such as Otto Dix. And in terms of cinema, you can talk about Fritz Lang's Metropolis film. So we're now going to go back in time and focus specifically in key topic 2 on Hitler and how he comes to power. So at first, the German Workers' Party, the DAP, is just called it's just founded by a guy called Anton Drexler. Hitler's not involved here. Hitler eventually joins the party after World War I, and one of the key things he's involved with is setting up the 25-point program. This means they're just going to have a really clear program setting out what they believe in. They're going to have a new office in Munich. They buy a newspaper so they can start spreading their ideas and views through this newspaper, and they adopt the swastika logo. They have a clever choice of name. They call the party, they change it from the DAP, the German Workers' Party, to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Now, nationalists suggest that it's clever because it suggests that they're patriotic. So people who want Germany to be strong will like them. But the socialist bit is a little bit, you might say it's a little bit of a trick. Hitler wasn't really a socialist. Socialist people want to really help the workers, and actually at the expense of maybe business owners, wealthy business owners. Hitler doesn't really believe in that, but he calls himself the Socialist Party because he's hoping that workers will think, oh yeah, we can support this party. So the 25-point program, it really sets out clearly their ideas about anti-Semitism. It really shows that they're anti-democracy and anti-Weimar as well. Membership does grow in this period. They also set up the SA paramilitary group in 1921. Paramilitary just means that it's not an official army. They're called the Brown Shirts, and this is really helpful for the Nazis because they're going to protect the Nazis. This is really a dangerous time to be a politician. In this period, we've got about 400 MPs or politicians who just get shot or killed in the street. So it's important that the Nazis have protection, but also the SA are going to intimidate rival political parties as well. So 1923, Hitler at this point thinks he's strong enough to be able to take power, and he tries to take power in Munich in the south. Now, why then and there? So first of all, the Weimar government, the Weimar Republic, was really weak due to hyperinflation in November 1923. So he thinks this is the perfect time to strike whilst it's still in a weak position. And he's hoping that lots of German people will support him in this push because they'll be annoyed. Mussolini had come to power in 1922 in Italy, and Hitler had very similar views to Mussolini. And so he thinks, okay, I'm inspired by that. I can do the same. And also they were very popular in Munich. So they thought, okay, that's why we're going to try and do it in Munich. So what they do, November 1923, Hitler takes 600 SA members to a local government meeting at a beer hall in Munich in Bavaria. They take control there. And then the next day, they march into the center of Munich. They're hoping that all of the people of Munich are going to come out and support them. They're hoping that the local police will do the same, the local army will do the same, and then they'll take over, the Nazis will take control of Munich and then be able to take control of the rest of Germany from there. It doesn't work like that. This is a complete failure. And what happens is the local police and army are called in to stop it. There's a bit of a shootout on the street. Hitler and all his supporters flee, they run away, and Hitler is arrested 2 days later. The whole Munich Putsch thing has failed miserably for Hitler. And by the way, I wouldn't even count this as a challenge to the Weimar Republic. It's not like the Spartacist uprising or the Cat Putsch, which really are threats. This, I wouldn't even count it. So as a result, what happens? The Nazi Party is banned. Hitler is sentenced to 5 years in prison. Now, this is bad in the short term, obviously, for the Nazis. However, in some respects, this is quite a positive thing in the long term for Hitler. Hitler is sent to prison, but he's under more like house arrest. He has quite comfortable position, conditions. He's able to get books in, have visitors, and he writes an important book called Mein Kampf, which really helps him to spread his ideas. And it becomes a really famous book in Germany and really spreads his message. Actually, the judge and someone in authority had actually supported Hitler, and he's released from prison early. So it actually shows Hitler, maybe some powerful people actually do support me. And actually, because the Munich Putsch had failed so much, it forces Hitler to actually change his ideas, and he has to really try and organize the party better. And also, he realizes he cannot take power through violence like he's tried to do at Munich. The only way he's going to get into power is democratically and not using violence. And that's going to just take a bit longer. So he actually starts to set his party up for the long term a bit more. So this is the period of the Weimar golden years where things are actually getting a lot better with Stresemann. And this is known as the lean years for the Nazi Party, because actually they really, in terms of votes and general elections, people don't really vote for them that much. However, Hitler reorganizes the party with branches all over Germany. They organize themselves like a government. So, for example, they have a part of the Nazi Party focusing on education, focusing on the economy, focusing on foreign affairs, which means that they look like they're ready to govern. They also set up special groups for women and youth, so they're getting some more support like that. And also, another thing that Hitler does really effectively in this period, he's getting money from wealthy businessmen like Krupps. The other thing that happens in this period is the Bamberg Conference of 1926. Before 1926, Hitler had been the leader still, but there was a lot of infighting in the party, and some people had different ideas about should they be socialist, who should be the leader, and sometimes you would say there was a lack of direction. After 1926, there's this conference, and it becomes clear that Hitler is going to be the leader, which means that the party now has a very clear direction, and that's actually going to be a positive thing for the party. Oh, no, the formatting has gone wrong now. So the next bit is the growth in support for the Nazis from 1929 to 1932. So the Nazi Party do start getting more popular. And a lot of it is linked to the Wall Street crash of 1929 and the Great Depression into the early 1930s. So 6 million people are unemployed in Germany. We have lower wages and businesses are closed down. Now, look, this is a real problem for the Weimar government. And they could, though, have solved it. I do think there were problems in Germany, but these politicians, you would say that they failed. They failed to agree to a solution. There's lots of infighting. No one is prepared to change their ideas or be flexible. And basically, nothing gets happened. And people started to get frustrated with the government. They're saying, we've got all of these economic problems with the Great Depression, and you're just fighting and you can't solve it. So they start turning to parties, extreme parties like the Communist Party, but also the Nazi Party. Now, as people start supporting the Communist Party, really wealthy people and middle-class people are really shocked and scared. They're worried that the Communist Party could get into power. And if the Communist Party gets into power, all of the wealthy people will have all of their wealth taken from them. So wealthy and middle-class Germans actually now start supporting the Nazi Party, not necessarily because they love Hitler, but because they're worried about communism. Now, look, it's not just this fear of communism. Some people genuinely do like Hitler. He's a very powerful public speaker. He's promised to stop communism. He's promised to restore law and order. He's saying he's going to focus on traditional values, take land only from Jews, and to reverse the Treaty of Versailles. So look, Hitler does do a good job. Now, in particular, he does a very good job of his propaganda. Hitler flew around the country in airplanes. Now, remember, they have this money from wealthy businessmen, and they used posters, speeches, and rallies really effectively. And the other thing is the SA made the Nazi Party look strong and disciplined, and they targeted rival political parties. So look, there's 3 reasons why the Nazi Party grow in support. You can talk about the impact of the Great Depression and the failure of the Weimar governments to deal with it. You can talk about the fact that Germans are really scared about the rise of communism and they want to vote for a party that they think can stop it. And the third reason is because actually Hitler was seen as an attractive leader and he used propaganda really effectively. Okay, so Hitler becomes popular. Now we need to look at the next thing, how he actually becomes chancellor. So by 1932, because of the reasons we've just mentioned, he becomes the most popular politician in Germany. But he actually loses the presidential election to Hindenburg in 1932. Now, Brüning, von Papen and von Schleicher were chancellors at this time. And none of them, though, could deal with the problems of unemployment. And in this period, they all have to resign or are simply sacked by Hindenburg because they're doing such a bad job. Now, look, Hindenburg does not really like Hitler that much. And he did not want to appoint Hitler as chancellor, even though Hitler was the most popular politician in Germany. That's usually what you would do. But Hindenburg is under pressure by the end of 1932 because he is essentially saying to Hindenburg, you need to sort this situation. You are president and we cannot deal with the impacts of the Great Depression. If you don't solve the situation, I am going to get my army friends and we're going to take over by force. So Hindenburg is under pressure. Now, von Papen, who was one of the terrible chancellors at the time, he actually makes an agreement with Hitler. He goes to Hitler and he says, I will persuade Hindenburg to make you chancellor, and I will be your vice chancellor. Do you agree to make me your vice chancellor? And Hitler says, okay. And von Papen thinks at this stage that Hitler will be chancellor, but that von Papen will be able to control him. So von Papen then persuades Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor. Hindenburg does this. In January 1933, Hitler is appointed chancellor of Germany, but Hitler just simply ignores von Papen and the plan has failed. So look, reasons why Hitler becomes chancellor. You could talk about the fact that Hitler is now the most popular politician in Germany, and you can explain why. You can talk about the failed chancellors in the period, such as Brüning, von Papen, and von Schleicher. But you could also talk about the failure and the unwise decision from Hindenburg and von Papen to appoint Hitler as chancellor simply because they thought they could control him, which was wrong. Okay, so the final two topics, key topic 3 is the Nazis are in control, and we're looking at how they, first of all, how they create a dictatorship. Now, Hitler starts off the 1933 as just a bog standard chancellor, but he then will become a dictator. So that question, sometimes they ask you how he's consolidated his power. So look, it's very simple. The first thing, he uses the Reichstag fire in February 1933 as an excuse to arrest thousands of communists, including communist MPs in the Reichstag. So the Reichstag fire, just think, he uses it to arrest communists and really weaken them. The next thing, he passes the Enabling Act in March 1933. This gives him the power to pass laws without asking the Reichstag MPs for approval. So what he's going to do, he's going to use this power to then ban other political parties and trade unions. The next group, he had rivals within the Nazi party, such as Ernst Röhm. Hitler does not like Röhm. He's jealous of his power over the SA. And there's also some rumors going around that Röhm might be trying to plot against Hitler. There's no real evidence for this, but Hitler believes it. The other thing is the German army, which Hitler wants to get on his side, does not like Röhm, as Röhm was planning on merging the SA with the army, so the army don't like Röhm and feel threatened by him. So in June 1934, Hitler kills over 400 people with the Night of the Long Knives, including Röhm, key members of the SA, and also von Schleicher. One thing you'd say about that really wins the army over because they're happy that he's reduced the power of the SA. Finally, Hindenburg dies naturally in August 1934. Now, Hitler could have held elections for a new president, but clearly he doesn't want to do that. He simply says, I'm now going to take that position of president, and I'm going to combine it with my position as chancellor, and he's now called the Führer. Final thing is the army were happy with Hitler, as previously said, because of the Night of the Long Knives. And so they, in 1934, they swear an oath of loyalty to him. And by August 1934, you'd say that Hitler has turned himself into a dictator. Okay, the next thing, police state. This is all about how Hitler is going to use the police to really control people's lives, to ensure that no one is speaking out against him, and to ensure that the law courts and the justice system will be controlled by Hitler. So, first of all, he does this through the use of Gestapo. This is the secret police. It really relies on informants. And what the Gestapo is doing is it's basically looking out for people who are critical of the Nazis. They don't wear a uniform. It's a secret police, and it's led by Heydrich, and they relied a lot on fear. There's not actually that many members of the Gestapo, but people felt like the Gestapo were everywhere, and so they just really don't speak out against the Nazi party. The SS controlled all of Germany's police and security forces. They had a black uniform, and they're led by Himmler. The SD were part of this as well, and they spied on opponents and critics of the Nazi party. They did have a uniform, and they're led by Heydrich. Now, if anyone is found to be criticizing the Nazi party, they'll be sent to not a normal prison with like people who are stealing stuff or whatever. They'll be sent to a special prison, a concentration camp. These are not death extermination camps, and these are prison camps for minority groups, prostitutes, homeless people, homosexual people, but also political prisoners, these people who've criticized the Nazis. Now, they also took control of the legal system. So law courts were dominated by judges who have been appointed by the Nazis, and juries were abolished. So the judge who's almost always supportive of the Nazis, will be making the decisions. The judges had to be pro-Nazi, and any judges who the Nazi authorities are not sure about, they don't fully trust, they just simply will be sacked. And all judges had to join the National Socialist League for the Maintenance of the Law. If any judges seem to be making decisions that don't favour the Nazi Party, they're gone. And by gone, I mean they'll be sacked. Now, you've got to then look about, in terms of the police state, Hitler takes close control over religion and the church, Protestant and Catholic churches in Germany. So at first, in terms of the Catholic Church, he makes the Concordat Agreement with the Pope in 1933. But then he goes back on it. At first, he essentially said, I'm not going to interfere with the Catholic Church. Catholic Church, your priests, just make sure they're not interfering and criticizing me. He then goes back on this. He starts arresting some Catholic priests, and he also closes down all Catholic schools and youth groups. So people can only attend Nazi youth groups, and schools will only be schools that have been approved by the Nazis. In terms of the Protestant Church, what happens is the Protestant churches that were supportive of the Nazis combined to form the Reich Church in 1936. These churches would have swastikas in them, and they're also banned from teaching the Old Testament, which was seen by the Nazis to be a Jewish part of the Bible. In terms of controlling and influencing attitudes, so the person in charge of this is Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels. He's in charge of propaganda, and he leads the Ministry of Propaganda. Very simply, anything critical of the Nazis or any ideas that the Nazis do not fully agree with will simply be banned. So they're using censorship. They're also really going to focus on spreading ideas with propaganda that are supportive and positive about the Nazis. So one of the things they do is they take control of the media, and that would include newspapers and radio stations. 1,600 newspapers were closed down, and they sell cheap radios to German people. So 70% of German households had radios by the end of the course. And what the Nazis did was, well, they altered the radios so that people could only access German radio stations and not, say, foreign radio stations from places like France. They would hold rallies, such as the annual rally at Nuremberg, which was attended by over 200,000 people each year. Swastikas were in sports stadiums, and sports teams had to do Nazi salutes before matches. In particular, in terms of sports, you need to know about the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Hitler uses this as a way to show off Nazi Germany strength and also to show how organized they are. They build a stadium with 110,000 people, and they even make a film all about this to show off how organized the games were. Hitler, in terms of art, he really likes German traditional art, and he's going to allow that to be in German art galleries. However, he bans artists such as Picasso and Van Gogh because he said that they were not like traditional German artists. In terms of architecture, Hitler really liked big, impressive buildings. And a lot of this was going to be inspired by ancient Greece and Rome, because these were powerful, especially Rome, the Roman Empire. This was a powerful old empire that he wanted to replicate. And one of his chief architects was a guy called Albert Speer, and he, for example, designed the impressive parade ground at Nuremberg. In terms of writers' literature, 2,500 writers were banned, such as the works by Sigmund Freud and Albert Einstein, and they were Jewish. There was public book burnings as well. In terms of films, the Nazis actually make themselves 1,300 films. They banned Disney cartoons, and they made their own cartoon, Hansi the Canary. Hansi the Canary looked a little bit like Hitler. They also have black crows who represent Jews in the cartoon. So opposition, resistance, and conformity. So there are high levels of conformity. People just actually went along with Hitler and the Nazis. We don't get huge rebellions against Hitler. There was acceptance of Nazi rule due to censorship, propaganda, but also there were some Nazi successes about, for example, reducing unemployment, and people were just scared. So some people do oppose the Nazis. So, for example, Protestant pastors such as Martin Niemöller set up the Pastors Emergency League. They set up the Confessing Church to rival the Reich Church. 6,000 joined this, and around 800 Protestant pastors were sent to concentration camps in this period. In terms of the Catholic Church, 400 Catholic priests sent to concentration camps. In terms of young people opposed the Nazis with the Swing Youth. So the Swing Youth, this is mainly people from middle-class families in towns and cities. They liked American clothes, films, and music, and they don't really challenge the Nazis that much. They organized illegal dances and liked jazz music, which Hitler didn't like because he saw it as black music. Then we get the Edelweiss Pirates. They're more working class. They wore long hair and copied American clothing. They would taunt Hitler Youth people. They went on long hikes and sang songs to mock Hitler Youth. There were only around 2,000 members. So look, I think what we're seeing here is very little actual opposition from young people to the Nazis. And I think the Hitler Youth had about 9 million members. Don't quote me on that. Okay, key topic for life in Nazi Germany. So first of all, we're going to look at life for women. Well, policies for women. Hitler wanted high birth rates, wanted German women to be having lots more babies. He wanted them to be focusing on marriage and children. He wanted women to know all about housecraft, needlework and cookery, all of these domestic skills. Loans were given to families with lots of children. And actually, the loans didn't have to be repaid, I think, if they had a certain number of children. Divorce became more difficult. And Hitler was awarding women who had lots of babies with special crosses, and they would also get these medals, bronze, silver and gold. In terms of employment, Hitler didn't support women being in work. He wanted women to stay at home. He wanted men to be breadwinners earning money. And the key thing he wanted women to focus on was Kinder, Küche and Köche, which is children, kitchen and church. Women were banned from jobs such as teachers, doctors. Oh, that's the bell going. Civil servants, judges, lawyers, and it was not encouraged for women to go to university. In terms of appearance, he wanted women to have a natural look, simple plaited hair, and long skirts, and not loads of makeup. Nazi policies towards the young. Okay, he wanted young people to see Hitler as a father figure. His rationale was that if he can get young people supporting Hitler, then when they're adults, they'll continue supporting him. He wanted to control all youth movements. And for example, he sets up the Hitler Youth. They did courses of Nazi ideas. So they're trying to indoctrinate them with Nazi ideas. They're teaching them to report disloyal people, even family members. They're saying if you hear them being critical of the Nazis, you need to tell them, you need to tell the authorities about them. Doing things like camping, hiking, sports competitions, map reading, shooting guns, essentially preparing them to be soldiers. He wants young people to be tough. They would have to do ice water plunges, have to do stuff like all of this stuff in really cold winter conditions to toughen them up. And if they're not following rules, they'll get punished as well. So there's this clear military element, especially for the boys. For girls, League of German Maidens was the main group. They'll go on rallies, swear oaths of allegiance, a bit like the boys, but also they get no military training, focus on cooking, ironing, making beds, sewing. They're taught this idea of racial hygiene, that German non-Christians should not be marrying non-Aryans. That's the basic idea. Basically, it's telling them you must only marry other Aryans, quote unquote. So in terms of education, the Nazis also control very closely what's happening in schools. Teachers, if they're not super supportive of the Nazis or they don't trust them, the Nazi authorities will simply sack them. At the beginning of lessons, all students and teachers had to do a Nazi salute, say Heil Hitler at the beginning and end of lessons. Classrooms had Nazi posters and flags. They had a new subject introduced called race studies, where they're taught about how the Aryan race was superior and taught how other races are inferior. They would do more PE because for Hitler, it was really important that young people were physically strong. Girls would focus on cookery, needlework. Textbooks were written by the Nazis, and they would have, for example, in their history textbooks, they would focus on stories about how Germany has done well in the past, and they won't focus on kind of wars, for example, that Germany's lost. Mein Kampf was studied by all students, and they were taught that Jews were evil in lessons. Okay, so then employment and living standards. So there was a problem with unemployment. About 5 to 6 million people were unemployed when Hitler gets to power, and that's something he's promised to solve. So first thing he's going to do is he's going to get people to work in labor service. Here, they're going to have paid work, but it's going to be really low paid. They're going to be doing stuff like repairing roads, draining marshes, planting trees. It's really not popular because the conditions were really bad. They're being treated like army, military conditions. They'd have to wear a uniform. They lived in camps, so not usually proper beds. Military drill, low pay, poor food and working conditions. Now, I would argue that this is not a proper job, but Hitler was saying, no, we're going to count this as a proper job, even though the conditions and the pay is so bad. The next thing, autobahns. Hitler spends a load of money. He plans to build 7,000 miles of new motorway. This is a really expensive project. It's good for trade and the economy. And they're also, similar to this, building bridges, coastal walls and sports facilities. This does employ a bunch of people in Germany. Next thing, he employs more people in the army because from 1935, he starts building up the army again and ignoring the Treaty of Versailles. And also, because they're building up the army, they need to produce more guns, they need more warplanes, etc. So actually, we get a bunch more people working in military factories, which also reduces unemployment. Now, look, Hitler says that he's massively reduced unemployment. And to be fair, more people are in work. However, he does trick the statistics. He includes unemployed people such as women and Jews. He just doesn't include them in his unemployment statistics, even though they technically didn't have jobs. The other thing is he includes people as employed, even though they were in part-time work, and people in the labour service. As I said before, it wasn't really a proper job because the pay was so bad. So in terms of improvements to standards of living in Nazi Germany, you do get more people in work. Wages do improve, especially for those skilled workers in military factories. And more people do own cars in this period. However, clearly, for some groups, this is not positive. For Jewish people, for example, the labour conditions were really poor and the pay was poor. There is a rise of prices of goods as well. So although people are earning more, they're not actually able to afford as much. So some people do not really see proper pay rises because they're actually having to pay more for goods. And also, one of the key things you have to know is German people were having to work longer. So the average weekly working time goes from 43 hours to 49 hours. So actually they're getting paid more, but they're having to work more as well. So you would argue that's not really a pay rise. Now, in terms of some other organizations that are set up, the first one is the Labour Front. This is designed to protect workers in terms of their conditions, their length of the working week, and minimum pay. But trade unions are also banned. The problem that workers have is they're being protected by the Nazis, but they can't negotiate their pay. Their working week has increased, and if they do anything wrong, they're going to be punished. So I would actually argue that working conditions for workers have actually got worse. Strength Through Joy was a program designed to keep workers happy, and it's trying to reward good, hard-working workers. So if you're a very strong, a good worker, you can go to things like you'll get treated to a sports event, films, theatre shows, outings, and even foreign travel. One of the rewards that they did introduce was the Volkswagen car thing. What happens is each month people can pay a tiny bit of their salary into this scheme, and eventually they'll be able to afford a Volkswagen car. Actually, no one in the end ever gets this Volkswagen car. The other thing is beauty of labour. What they're doing here is they're trying to improve facilities for workers, so better factory conditions, better workplaces, offices, etc. They're trying to have better toilets, changing rooms, showers, and canteens. Companies that did this would get tax breaks from the government, so they don't have to pay as much in tax. The big issue for workers, though, is the workers are the ones who have to build all of this stuff, and they don't get any extra pay. And if they refuse to do it, they could be sacked. So final part of the course is the persecution of minorities. So in terms of racial beliefs, Hitler believed in this idea of eugenics. This is the idea that strong people with strong, I say this in inverted commas, strong genes, genetics, should be encouraged to have children and reproduce, but the weak should not. He believed that the Aryan race was superior, and that he believed in this idea of racial hygiene. This is the idea that Aryans should not reproduce with non-Aryans. Slavs, Roma, and Sinti people were seen as subhuman, so almost not fully humans, almost more like animals. These people were sent to concentration camps and in some cases lost German citizenship or were deported. Some homosexuals were sent to concentration camps or imprisoned, and they were encouraged voluntary castration, which means that they will not be able to biologically have babies. People who are mentally ill, alcoholic, deformed, epileptic, deaf, or blind were sterilized, which means that they're no longer able to reproduce. And there was the T4 program, which killed babies with severe disabilities and young people as well. The main group that's targeted is Jewish people. Jewish people were seen as unworthy of life. They're banned from certain jobs at first, certain places. They're forced to sit on yellow benches. Jewish businesses are boycotted. Then they lose their citizenship. They're banned from relationships with Christian Germans, not Aryans, and then Kristallnacht as well. So the boycott is when Jewish businesses, doctors, and lawyers were boycotted. Jewish stars or Jude were written outside these businesses. Nuremberg laws of 1935, Jews lost their citizenship, their right to vote, and have to wear a yellow star on their clothing. Kristallnacht is the first real concerted, violent effort against the Jewish population. This is called the Night of the Broken Glass, or the November Pogrom. 814 shops, 171 homes, and 191 synagogues are destroyed, and 100 Jewish people are killed. This was organized by the Nazi authorities. They made it look like it was just ordinary people doing it, but actually it was the Nazi authorities doing it, and they told the police to do nothing to stop the violence. Right, That's been a quick run through of the whole of Weimar and Nazi Germany in terms of the specification. Clearly, you've got to do more revision, but this should be a very good start to your revision. All right, thanks very much. Take care and all the best. Bye-bye.